Alright, hello everybody. Welcome to another camera class. Let me get the video pulled up here. So I want to thank everybody for watching today. I know it's not Thursday, our typical day for camera classes, but we're doing it today because I will be out of town this week and can't be here on Thursday. Today is intermediate camera knowledge, one of probably the favorites of a lot of people. Really what today is all about is getting away from automatic. We are going to be talking, we're going to be talking about everything that goes into shooting on your camera, but that doesn't involve automatic settings. Things that are important to know when shooting on things like manual, or aperture priority, or shutter priority. We're going to talk about that. We're then going to look at some photos at the very end and discuss what I'm seeing in there as far as ISO, aperture, and shutter are concerned. And then from there, we're going to kind of just end the class and get ready for next week's class, which will be then advanced cameras. But again, today is graduating from the simple point and shoot methods of a camera and learning how to take a quality photo in an actual manual setting or control. So let's jump into it. Let's get started. First and foremost, why do we go advanced point and shoot DSLR or mirrorless? Why do we want to become better with our camera? And the real reason behind that is because the camera is a tool. It's a vehicle in order to get a final product that we're after. In order to get that product or to get the best results possible, we need to make sure that we're using these pieces of technology as a tool. That's what they are. They're meant to help us elevate and take whatever it is we're trying to do and get the best results out of it. And that might be perfect for you to just use automatic and to stick with that or program auto. However, it might behoove you, or it might be more important to you to get something that's more quality, to get something that's a better resolution or better just image overall. And really the way that we do that is by using manual controls to really set the camera up to take the most optimal picture for the environment that we're in. In that regard, I'm going to talk about what I look at as a snapshot versus a photograph. To me, this is a snapshot. This is a quick image of our escalator heading up on the north side of our atrium. When you ride up that escalator, we have a beautiful mural on the ceiling that calls out the Chicago skyline a little bit. And so as you're riding up on the elevator, you get to see these buildings and skies and clouds. It's really cool looking, but this photo doesn't do any justice to that mural, to that design. Really what this would be, it might be a quick picture I sent to friends or somebody to let them know, hey, I'm over in this section of the store, meet me there, that sort of thing. But if I set my camera, I look at my aperture, my shutter, my ISO, I look at things like my exposure compensation, or my focus parameters, or my white balance presets and settings, and I really fine-tune and set and control all of that, I can take a photo that looks like this and turn it into something that looks like this. And that's what we're really trying to get into today, folks, is we're really trying to figure out how we can take a simple and easy to do photo, something as basic as this escalator that we have with a really cool mural on the ceiling. How do we take that and go from a snapshot to something that's thought out and curated as a photo? So I'm hoping that today, with all my tips and tricks and everything else I can give to you, that I can give you something that is reminiscent of that and shows off a little more of the quality that I think you deserve to see. And what I really want you to take away from this is that the camera is a tool, that if you can learn how to customize and play with the settings, then you can learn how to elevate that photo and take something that's a little bit more artistic like this. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Step one, as I talked about last Thursday, is learning your camera. Learn the basics of the camera, how it functions, how it works. It's a really important step in this whole process. Every camera is different. Every camera company is a little different. There's a lot of factors that go into this whole thing. However, it's very, very easy to just get your hands onto manuals or YouTube videos or other resources out there and in order to learn the true basics of your camera. If you go online and type in your camera model on YouTube, you will find hundreds of videos from my camera nerds or just people who love photography so much, explaining the ins and outs and the features that you might not even be aware of on your camera. Since I've made this video and since I've been doing this class now for the past 2 years, all of these have updated. Each camera company, whether it's Canon, Nikon, Sony, or other brands like Leica, Lumix, Olympus, or Fujifilm, everybody now probably has about 7 to 8 new cameras on top of this lineup that they already have. So again, it really behooves you to go out there and look up the models and become more familiar with your camera body and the settings and everything else that are on. That's step one. Once you feel like you've kind of accomplished that, let's now dive more into the mode dial. Last week I talked about how this is kind of like your gear shifter on your car. The gear shifter on your car makes you go from neutral to reverse to drive to shifting from gears 1 and 2 to going into park, all that. And it's very reminiscent of what the mode dial on your camera does, which is again the main driving force between your operations on your camera. It's how you dictate whether you're shooting in an automatic setting or something that's more manually controlled. So your steps, or your next steps, as I like to go to, is automatic and program auto are the first 2 settings I recommend you do. That's the A, that could be IA, green symbol on your camera, green camera symbol. Then there also is going to be a P on the camera, and that's program automatic. And what we're really diving into today are the manual controls. We're going to look at aperture priority, shutter priority, and full manual control. Why are we looking at all this? Because again, we're trying to learn how to use the ins and out features of our camera and not just rely on the basic automatic settings that are available. What's really going to deliver us into this more manual control and more of something that gives a personalized touch to our experience is what we call the exposure triangle. This is one of the most important things to learn in photography, and it doesn't matter what camera you use, operate, could even be your cell phone for all I care. Every camera, when you go into manual control, needs to know these 3 things. So what I'm going to do is break all of that down for you. We'll start with our aperture, and we'll make our way through into ISO. We'll look at some image references as well too along the way to really drive home those lessons and that knowledge, and hopefully this is something that you can practice on your own, whether you're at home or on vacation or just holding your camera in your hand right this second. Let's start with our aperture priority. Aperture priority is simple and straightforward. Aperture controls 2 different things: how much light is coming into the camera and how much you are separating your foreground from your background. Why something like that might matter is for portraits. When we look at portrait photography, typically what you'll end up seeing is that the background is completely blurred and our main focus is on our subject matter in the foreground. Aperture works with the smaller the number, the more blurred the background is, the higher the number, the more both the background and the foreground come into effect. When thinking about that in that way, we can see that f1.4, our background is completely missing and gone, whereas f22, our background is all there and so is our foreground. If we look though at the number itself with the circle next to it, we can see that the white part of the circle gets smaller towards the higher number. Meaning that because we're making sure that we get both the foreground and the background into perspective, we are limiting the amount of light coming into the camera, therefore darkening our image. The smaller the number is, though, the more light we're letting into the camera body. Therefore, the more light that's hitting our physical camera, making it much easier for us to take more detailed photos in low light situations, or photos that require more speed even too, as far as shutter is concerned. Aperture priority would be a great setting to use if you're just focused on the background to foreground relationship and how that can look and change. Some examples of that. On the left side, we have our dogs. We can see that the background is blurred out, but we can still make out the dog's finer details. We can see little things like the pink collar, the black and brown spots and coloration, yet the dog in the very front, the foreground, their nose is completely in focus and has all of the grooves and ridges. If we look back to our chart, we're probably sitting at something like an f8, maybe an f5.6. Background is still visible, but not quite in full detail, much like its f22 or 16 counterpart is. Looking on the right side at the squirrel, we can see that the background is completely blurred out, and all we have to focus on is the squirrel and a little bit of that brown branch. In that regard, we probably are looking closer at that f1.4, maybe an f2, depending on the lens and the quality that we're shooting on. Keep in mind that when we have a deep photo where everything is visible from foreground to background, we have a darker image as a whole because we're letting less light in. Therefore, we have to compensate with our ISO, or our shutter speed if we're using full manual. If we're just using aperture priority, the camera is going to do majority of the work for us. On the flip side of that, the shallow realm, we have a blurred out background. We can't see much of the background. However, the dog appears to be lighter in color and in texture than its left side opponent. Why does something like that matter? Again, it's up to you, the photographer, to figure out reasons why that might be more important. Having a more shallow photo means the background is blurred out, but we have our primary focus on the subject matter, in this case the dog. The dog is lighter in color and texture, and we can see that, versus on the opposite side on the left, the background might be deeper. We might be getting the foreground and the background, but we can see how dark the ridges of the dog are, and really it shows in the face where there is more open rather than underneath the legs of the dog where things might be darker just because of shadows and other dark compiling colors. I like this photo to explain for aperture priority. Why would we want to use something like aperture priority? Why does that matter for you? And I would say the biggest reason is because aperture priority, or aperture in general, is our control of foreground to background. In this photo, we have a beautiful picture of a background and a model, or a friend, or a wife, or girlfriend, a sister, a cousin, someone standing right there in the foreground. If the background wasn't as pretty as it was, we might blur the background out and just focus on our main subject matter, so she could post this on social media, share with friends or relatives, use this for online portfolios, or use this for some form of photo that she'd want to have. But because of how nice this background is, we've kept both in focus and parameter, and therefore we are not blurring the background out at all. We're keeping that in full definition. Aperture priority might be a perfect example of something to use here when you need to care about both the background and the foreground, but that might change throughout the night or the time or whatever it is that you're doing. So why use aperture priority? Because you don't necessarily need to worry about the speed or the lighting conditions. You're more so worried about your foreground and background separation when it comes to the photos that you're taking. Aperture priority is one of my personal favorite modes to be in because I have full control over a lot of things, but when I want to blur that background out and just get good focus on my subject, I can. Shutter speed or shutter priority is our next big topic here. Shutter priority is the control of the speed at which our shutters are opening and closing to get the shot that we have or need. In the flip-flop of aperture priority, where the aperture, the higher the number is, the smaller and less light that comes in, the more foreground to background separation we have, the less foreground to background separation that we have. Shutter speed is looking at the speed at which our object is moving and trying to freeze that image. The higher the number, the faster it's going. That 1 represents a second. So 1/500th of a second, we're freezing the running man. As we slow down and we get closer to that half a second, the more blur, the less freezing in action that we're getting. Why shutter matters for any reason and why you wouldn't just use a faster speed every time you get the image is that the slower our shutter goes, the more light we're letting in. So when we're using things like an f/22, if we can slow down the picture as a whole, we can get something much more crisp and locked onto, as opposed to using any of the other ones where we don't necessarily get all of that in one shot. Something that's using 1/1000th or faster freezes high speed action and movement. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that no matter what, when it comes to using shutter priority or any type of control that freezes action, blur is not necessarily a bad thing. It can really give a nice sense of motion, just like we're seeing here where the bird itself is frozen, the colors are beautiful, we can see the tiny little bug it caught in its mouth, yet we can see the blur on the wings, which shows movement, gives a sense of just it not being slow, but being quicker. Long exposure can also be done in the shutter priority, where we're letting longer periods of time go by with the shutter staying open, getting us more information, more data into the camera, which will create these beautiful streams of color. When you look at the green on this photo, you can see all the different variations of the color. The movement of the water is beautiful, and those dark portions of the rock have texture and value to them, rather than it being a stark, flat image because you shot very quickly. To give another little chart of how this works, the slower your camera goes, the brighter the exposure is. And the faster your camera goes, the darker the exposure goes. To put that also into perspective, blurred motion typically will show as a slower speed, whereas a freezed motion or frozen motion comes from that faster speed. So it is a trade-off on this, but much like aperture does the same thing of letting light in or being the catalyst that decides foreground to background separation, shutter speed does something similar, where by showing a brighter image we have a slower photo, but by showing a darker image we're getting a faster, more frozen image. Why would we want to use something like shutter priority? It's to get a photo similar to this, but in a crisper fashion. I had a customer send this to me one of my first few weeks here at Apt because I sold them a camera and they claimed I gave them the wrong type of product based on what they needed. And I explained to them that it wasn't necessarily the baseball bat, but the baseball player as a whole. You're using the camera on an automatic setting in a dark area of downtown Chicago. They were at Grant Park. You're not going to get an image that's necessarily frozen by using a non-shutter priority mode. If you're looking to freeze your image in faster movements, using something like shutter priority or full manual control will deliver a better result because of the fact of how your camera is firing and being used. And I've had other customers come in and say something similar where they'll get a good shot here and there with the modes that they're using, but then it won't look great. And that's because you're using an automatic mode. Yes, maybe 1 in every 20, maybe 1 in every 5 photos will look perfect, but a majority of the time you will have blurrier images that don't necessarily capture the value or the clarity that you want. So speed the camera up or slow the camera down better with shutter priority. Allow for the other things like aperture and ISO to be controlled automatically by the camera. And this is a great setting to use when you are concerned about speed. We just had the Kentucky Derby last weekend, or this last weekend. Using something like shutter priority might have been a great way of capturing the horses as they're running at the speeds that they're at. Your kids' track meets, your baseball games, football in the fall, any of that stuff can be really frozen nicely with your shutter priority. So ISO is very similar in a lot of different ways to our other controls. It's the dictation of light. However, this is more dictative or more controlling of the sensitivity of light that our camera is experiencing. I'm a big fan of ISO, and there is no ISO setting or just only focus on that. You either turn it on automatic or you control it yourself manually. And you can see between the 100, the 200, the 400, and the 800 that are present in this image, how much lighter the photo gets as we turn it up. The brighter it is outside, the less ISO we need, so smaller of a number. And the darker it is in our environment, the higher the number can go. The reason being is that we're making it more sensitive in darker situations to pick up on light that we might not be getting off the bat. And we're making it darker or harder for it to pick up light in extremely bright and overly light situations. That's the nice part about ISO. Another example here, we have the sun that's out where we have a rainbow, but it's a cloudy, overcast day. At 100, almost all the way up to 400, it's a little too dark, but at 800 and 1600, we still get to have that rainbow, but we have more light and more information on the image than we did at 100. ISO and noise, though, play hand in hand. So if we have an image that's in a very bright setting or in a setting that doesn't require a strong ISO, it can screw up our images and give us a noisy image. So playing with ISO in the field is important to understand what it is you need to have your settings at in order to get exactly what you want out of your imaging. Auto ISO is one of my personal favorites, and I use auto ISO almost all the time. And I had a customer come in one time, a mother, who was getting ready for prom season, and she asked me, what do I think? Well, auto ISO is a great time to use automatic ISO is when you are shooting indoors and outdoor settings and bouncing in between the two, or the light that you have is variable. In these types of settings, it's really nice to be able to use automatic ISO because it's going to help produce clean and well thought or well curated images based on the light and the environment that you're in. Your camera will automatically sense the light and dictate how much to bring into it without overdoing it. Why that's important or why that's a nice feature is because with your camera, they're smart enough nowadays to recognize and read light in an appropriate manner or fashion. Reviewing, we have our aperture, our shutter, and our ISO, the three most important factors of our camera. Aperture is going to dictate how much of the foreground to background separation we have, how much we're letting in for light, and how much that we're blurring the background out and just focusing in on our subject of our photos. Shutter speed is going to dictate the speed at which we're capturing fast-moving objects. And ISO is controlling how much sensitivity our sensor is having. With aperture, the higher the number goes, the less light we're letting into the camera. And the lower the number goes, the more light we're letting in. Shutter, the faster our speed is going, the darker our image can occur. The higher the number, the darker the image. The lower the number, the lighter the image. And with ISO, we get more noise if we're in a situation where we don't need such high ISO. Too high of ISO might make things look pixelated, blurry, and what we would call fuzzy. Versus too little ISO makes things very dark and overly saturated, not enough color or vibrancy to the image. Now there's other settings to keep in mind too. We have our exposure meter. Positive numbers will raise the exposure meter, making our photo appear brighter. Negative numbers, or lower number, will lower the exposure, making it darker. Typically, if we look at our camera, we might see something that looks like this. Light metering is another way we can play with our settings on our camera. Now, every brand has a couple of their own. Sony and Canon have 4 instead of the traditional 3 that most of the camera brands nowadays have. But if we look at this, multi looks at the light from different points at the sensor. Center looks at light in the middle and radiating from it. And spot will only look at the center portion of the sensor. This can give you more dramatic effects, and depending on the manufacturer, the main camera's icon can then, or metering, can really dictate how dramatic or moody your photos are based on where the light is being sourced from in the camera settings or in the camera sensor. White balance is another nice thing to take a look at and pay attention to. You can always leave it on auto. It's a simple fail-safe mode for snapshots, but white balance may vary from one shot to the next and you may not get the colors that you're expecting. So keeping that in mind, we have all of these other settings or presets that are available, and typically under those presets we either have something that is completely customizable or we have these that are customizable in themselves. Incandescent. This is the closest match for regular domestic lighting and will correct the color much more effectively than auto white balance. Fluorescent. This comes in many different types, and current DSLRs offer no fewer than 7 alternatives, so trial and error might be needed for these. Direct sunlight, calibrated to give natural colors under midday sun, and you can use it to fix a standard, use it as a standard as a fix for recording sunlight. Using this preset can prevent skin tones from turning cold. So again, this is more on the red side, but more of a middle ground as well too. Cloudy, light has a cooler tone under a cloudy sky, and this preset will warm up the colors. It's good for portraits, but can be too much for landscapes. Shade, this is designed for open shade under a blue sky. This preset will give you more natural looking skin tones. Now K is for more advanced DSLRs. That'll let you set the white balance, color temperature manually, and use some studio lighting. So again, this is more for your change or for your advanced settings. And then pre is more of another one that's again more of a customized setting, mainly on DSLRs, and I cut it off because it really isn't that important much anymore, given that you have the K setting and that you also have the customizable abilities too with these cameras. Now, really what we're building up to is we have all of these presets and all of these things that we can change, but what we're working on as a whole is full manual control of our camera. Full manual control is going to give us the ability to play with all of these things: aperture, shutter, ISO, white balance, light metering, focus parameters, exposure compensation, target recognition, white balance, all of the things that when used and manipulated properly can give our photos a new advanced measurement towards light as a whole. These are little things, but they overall can be big picture items or features that you can set on your camera that really maneuver and manipulate your photos in such a way that it comes out more artistic, more dramatic, more light-hearted, more whatever it is that you're aiming for. And that's the beauty of using manual control. So what I'd like to see is if we can look at some of these images and predict our 3 settings: our ISO, our aperture, and our shutter. These are all my guesses on what they are. However, just by thinking about as the mind of a photographer who's been doing this for years, I can look at lighting and presets and everything else kind of in that photo and usually dictate what exactly I'm seeing. So this will be how we end the class today. We'll talk about some accessories at the very end that you might need, but I'll go through these images kind of quickly, and if you have questions, as always, you can chat in and I'll answer them live for us here on the camera. So we have a nice landscape of a bridge photo. It looks dark, but the lights look very saturated. I probably would put ISO at around 1600, maybe at the most 32. When it comes to the actual aperture on this, everything looks like it's in focus, so I probably would put this at a f16, maybe at an f8, depending on how much light they wanted to let in. Excuse me. When it comes to our shutter speed, there's not a lot of movement here. And because that we have such a higher aperture, we probably want to let more light in with a slower shutter. So I probably would put this somewhere closer to maybe 1/150th of a second, maybe 1/50th of a second as a whole, just something slower. And if there's a tripod involved, it might be even a half a second or something in that realm. Here we have some cherry blossoms. The lighting outside is really good, so I probably would put this at maybe a 100 for ISO. If we're looking at the aperture of there, we can see the background is blurred out very nicely, but our main cherry blossoms in the front are in focus. So I probably would put this closer to maybe an f4 or an f6, just because we can make out that there are other cherry blossoms, but we can't necessarily see them in the finer detail like we can in the front ones. And for shutter, unless there's a big breeze that's blowing through, deterring our images, we probably aren't looking at anything too crazy. In shutter, I probably would say 1/150th of a second or 1/250th of a second. Again, we don't need too much going on with all the light that we have in this photo. Here we have our firemen. In this photo, we can see that there are two firemen, one in front, one behind. We can definitely tell that is a fireman, similar to the dog photos we looked at the very beginning for our aperture. This probably is somewhere at 5.6. Lighting conditions are a little dark, however, there's still a lot going on in the image that we can get light from the behind. So we're probably looking at somewhere around a 400 to 800 ISO. And for shutter, unless they're walking towards the camera and we're trying to get a quick snapshot of them in freezing image, this is probably somewhere at a 1/150th or 1/250th of a second. Here we have our ram head. A lot of detail on this ram, so we probably have a slower image as a whole. Probably somewhere closer to 1/50th of a second or 1/100th of a second. Again, depending on if this ram is alive or if it's a stuffed mannequin or if it's even moving or if it's just frozen. Now you do have some snow on the ground, yet the background is blurred out. So we're probably looking again around that f5.6, maybe an f4 or an f8 as well too, because we can definitely tell what that is on the ground. And as far as ISO goes, this does look like a saturated, well-saturated image, yet it is dark in a lot of different spots. I probably would say it's about a 100, all the way up to maybe a 400, 800 if we're really pushing with low light situations. Here we have movement with our dogs. Both backgrounds are blurred out very nicely. So this is definitely an f1.4 to f2. Maybe a 2.8 at the highest. Again, backgrounds are fully blurred out. We can't necessarily make them out in very good detail. Yet the amount of light that's coming in, the freeze frame on this is definitely a 1 in 1,000 speed. And ISO is probably a 100 to 200 based on the speed of the camera being so high, but also not too high because the aperture is wide open. So we're letting a lot of light into this photo. We're freezing the frame, and we're blurring out the image so that our main focus is the dogs that are getting airborne on these frisbee catches. And I believe this is one of the last images to evaluate, but we have a football player jumping into the end zone, scoring a touchdown. It looks like they've evaded a couple different tacklers. The sun is very bright. You can see how the shadow is being casted on the field of football. So ISO is probably a 100 to 200. Speed is probably close to that 1 in 1,000th of a second, only because you can see the turf particles fly up in the air. You can can see how frozen this guy is as he's jumping into the end zone. Overall, it's a sports photo that shows really nice freeze frame action. And as far as the aperture is concerned, the background players are blurred out slightly, but the main end zone on the other field is definitely blurred out and not in focus. This is probably closer to an F8, maybe an F11 or so, where the background's blurred but not quite too much where you can make out the other players. Yet when we look further down the field, we can really see the blur on there, so the main focus was the football players as a whole. Now again, I like to drive this in as one of the last points of my class. Learning your camera is only the first step to this whole practice and project. I can sit here and tell you everything I know under the sun. You can come into the store and ask me more questions as you have them. But I will say this much. Photography only goes as far as you're willing to practice. If you're buying a camera for the first time and you're just getting into this, this class will not teach you how to use your camera perfectly the first or second time. It takes weeks, months, and years of practice to understand the fundamentals that go into photography and to really make sure that you're giving yourself the best opportunity to get the photos that are presented to you. I've had parents, I've had friends, I've had family come up and ask me many, many questions on using their camera, and I help them to the best of my abilities, but I still see them from time to time coming on in to learn more about their cameras. And I can tell that it is from a lack of practice and a lack of wanting to just continue to push themselves to be in an uncomfortable position. So get out there, use the camera as a tool. Be open to using manual controls, even if you are very comfortable with automatic and you like to stay there, that's great. But you can do so much more with the manual controls and with the actual aspect of learning those controls. So I definitely and I strongly believe that you should attempt to try. My best accessories that might be free to you or might be the easiest for you is practice first and foremost. Set up a still life at home, sit down, shoot, and work with your camera in order to understand and to just get it. Take classes. If they're free classes, if they're paid for classes, you won't regret it. It's fun, it's good, you're in camaraderie situations with other fellow photographers who will also help you learn, just like the teacher's trying to help you learn. YouTube is still one of my favorite resources. I strongly recommend it to anybody getting into photography as a whole. YouTube has thousands upon thousands of videos on your camera, on the basics of photography, on specific settings that you need to learn about, on how to shoot in certain environments too. There's so much that you can learn if you just watch a few YouTube videos. Workshops are great too. Look at workshops, look at different ways that you can better yourself. Again, you might have to pay for these, but in the long run, if you're serious about this, it's a great way to do it. And travel. That is my best and foremost biggest thing when it comes to photography. I'm traveling this week. I'll be in Las Vegas for a week. When I go out there, I will have my camera and my lens with me at all times. Doesn't matter where I'm at, whether it's the pool, the casino floor, or just walking around. I will have the camera with me to take fun photos and to learn photography as a whole. Why? Because it's fun to put yourself into different situations with different lighting and different experiences to get the best images possible. I strongly would recommend to anyone going out and traveling that you bring your camera with you and figure out a way to carry it. Now, if you're buying accessories, I always recommend the top 4 are the ones you need. Buy a bag to protect your gear. Get an extra battery and a memory card. You won't regret that. Have a cleaning kit. Don't use your shirt, your sweater, a cloth that you're using to wipe the other stuff in the house down. Use a microfiber glass cloth. Same thing you would use if you're wearing glasses or sunnies, and that'll help you clean your lens really well. Get a camera strap. Again, it's easy for you to put something down and forget it, but if it's strapped on you, you won't forget or lose it. Tripods are excellent if you need to take those types of still photos. External hard drives are great. polarizing filters, neutral density filters, and additional lenses. We talked about it last week. I strongly do recommend them. And that is all I have for you guys today. Next Thursday is the advanced photography, and it will be on Thursday. I won't be traveling much this summer, so from now on, guys, Thursdays are going to be the day for classes. If anything comes up, changes, or is present, I'll let everybody know. But next Thursday, advanced photography, we get into photo editing, and we talk a little bit more about the process that's involved with that. Guys, I'm going to stay on for about 13 more minutes or so. I'm going to just look at some emails. If you guys have questions or comments or concerns, message me right now, put them there, email me, call me even if you'd like to talk, or just on this one, chat. Ask me any questions that you might have on cameras, photography, videography, and I'll answer those live here on the video for you. Thanks everyone for joining. I'll stay on for maybe 12 more minutes, maybe a little less if nobody's asking any questions. Doesn't look like anybody has any questions for me on this one, so I'm going to sign off until next Thursday, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you guys being out here for this. As always, we do camera classes every Thursday from 5:30 to 7. Next Thursday is then the advanced photography, where we're going to talk a little bit about photo editing and what goes into that. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concern, you can give me a call, shoot me an email anytime. I'm here every day except for Tuesdays and Wednesdays typically. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for being here on a Monday instead of Thursday.